everything that's happened in my life, the good and the bad, has led me to where I am now. I saw the conversation moving online. I was fascinated by blogs and bloggers. I could see that the world was hungry for this conversation. The founder game is not just a young person's game. I don't ever look back and think, oh, why did that happen?
Arianna Huffington, she's a force. Big one, big energy.
We all know how increasingly addicted we are becoming to our phones, to social media, to games.
It is truly, at this point, pivotal to understand the benefits of the type of lifestyle that she is pushing.
It's impossible to talk about mental health without talking about technology.
Arianna Huffington is one of the few people who's identifiable just with her first name. There's only one Arianna.
Arianna leads and then we all follow.
The growth in our interactions with our phones is accelerating beyond our ability to cope.
Arianna. If you were to look at the sort of wattage of her Rolodex, it would light up a city.
She's connected. I mean, everybody knows her.
If she likes you and if you become friends, then you know that you've got a friend for life.
I grew up in Athens, Greece. My mother, my younger sister, and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment. We felt that the world was a big stage, a playground where you can really experiment, you can try things. We had very little money, but my mother had always made us believe in ourselves beyond our circumstances. My mother used to say failure is not the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone to success. We had also an amazing father that I must tell you about. He was a journalist, very gifted in the written word. He fought the Germans in the Second World War through a paper that he was writing, and he was caught and taken to the camps. For a year and a half, he survived the camps in Germany. He wasn't Jewish, but a lot of Greek people were taken in the camps because they were fighting the Nazis. He and my mother met after the Second World War and had Arianna and me. Unfortunately, things didn't really work out. When my mother was very unhappy with my father, Arianna encouraged my mother to leave him. I remember the conversation. She was 12, and she had this wisdom and this insight that what really mattered was that, you know, we were able to be in an environment that was more peaceful. I feel very blessed to have an amazing relationship with my sister. We are very close. We talk about everything. We have no secrets from each other, and we are there supporting each other through everything. She was an incredible student. So my mother found her this amazing teacher, this professor, Professor Sheldon, I remember his name. The dictatorship, the junta, came over to Greece, and the army occupied Greece.
To talk too loudly or blatantly is unhealthy in Athens nowadays.
It was a very scary time. I remember it was an afternoon at 4 o'clock. Arianna had to go to her lesson, and there was outside our door, there were soldiers with machine guns, and the radio just announced that nobody's allowed to go out in the streets or they'll be shot, basically. So I see her from our living room window. She's walking down our street. The soldiers say, you have to come back. You're not allowed out. Where are you going? She said, I have a class at 4 o'clock and I can't miss it. It's such a gift to see yourself as a lifelong learner and to constantly be excited about learning.
She learns on the go and plugs it into that heuristic she walks around with and isn't afraid of taking a different approach to things based on what she's learned and how that fits into her view of the world.
I was coming home from school and I saw a picture of Cambridge University on the cover of a magazine, and something made me really want to go there. My mom didn't say, don't be ridiculous, you don't speak English, we don't have money, I'm sure it's hard even for English girls to get into Cambridge. My mother said, let's see how we can make that happen. Because, when you were in a little apartment in Athens, Greece, Cambridge feels like it's the moon. How are you going to get there? What was really special about my mother is throughout this journey of studying to get into Cambridge, she never made me feel as though getting into Cambridge was the most important thing. She always made me feel that it was a grand adventure, and that if we didn't succeed, if we didn't get into Cambridge, life was still a grand adventure, and there would be other things, and that she wouldn't love me any less. That sense of unconditional loving was the foundation of my childhood and remained the foundation of my life. When I first went to the Cambridge Union, I was just completely captivated by the spectacle of people's hearts and minds being moved by words. And I just wanted to learn to speak. And that was hard because I had an even stronger accent than now.
On Monday, there is a debate on the English legal system.
I persevered just because I really loved it.
The exact motion is the present English legal system is incompatible with justice.
And also because, again, back to my mother, it was okay if I failed. I started as an author accidentally. I was debating the changing role of women at the Cambridge Union. And a British publisher happened to see the debate on television and sent me a letter asking me if I would write a book on the views I expressed in the debate. And he took me to lunch and offered me a modest advance. So that's how I became an author. Because the book was a success, after that, everybody wanted me to write more on women. But I feel I had said absolutely everything I knew about women. I was 24. I came to the United States when my biography of Maria Callas was published, which was my third book. The biography ended up being an incredible piece of work. Simon & Schuster bought it here and then invited Arianna to come and launch the book here. And that was the beginning of our American dream coming true, because when she came here, she was met with tremendous open doors, tremendous. I came to the United States because the man I was in love with, that I had been with for 7 years in my 20s, right after I left Cambridge, didn't want to marry me, didn't want to have children, and by the time I was 30, I really knew I wanted to have children. So I put the Atlantic Ocean between us and moved to New York.
She's very infectious in her personality in that she has this warm charisma about her. She introduces you to her daughter or to her sister Agape, and you feel like you become part of the family.
I have really always wanted to share what I was going through if it could help other people. When I went through a divorce with 2 young children, I wanted to talk about the importance of co-parenting. My ex-husband and I were really able to do that. It wasn't easy. Arianna's biggest dream, always, as a little girl, she always wanted to be married and have children. I was very blessed to be able to have 2 healthy little girls, one when I was 38 and one when I was 40. So that was her treasures. Oh, you know what, Isabella? You can pick a name of maybe Shannon or Sabrina.
As a kid, you always think you're the center of attention, but I don't even think I knew my mom was as busy as she was, because we always were the focal point. She took us to school from 6th to 12th grade.
Yes, I always drove my girls to school.
And she's a horrible driver, so it was a very stressful experience.
School and our home were not far from each other, so there's not that much that can go wrong in, the 5-minute span it takes to get there.
They probably told you what a terrible driver I am.
One day she was picking me, my sister, and a good friend of ours up from school, and she rolls up to school with a tree on the Prius and the emergency light flashing, and it's cracked. But this is truly my mom. She didn't want to miss picking us up from school.
The Huffington Post was a radical idea.
The reviews initially were really negative.
She started with just about $1 million in financing, and the fact that it became such a success that it could sell for $315 million means that she did something right.
I wrote 15 books, and they're on very different topics. And behind all these books is kind of my own curiosity, my own passion about a subject, and going all in. The magic of Arianna is that she connects the dots. I call her like the goddess Athena, which is the strategist.
Her ability to bring people together, to see that, oh, this one can help this one, and put those things together to make something else happen is an absolute talent.
She brings the people together, and then she pulls something else from here and something from there, and suddenly you feel she's able to make something happen.
I met Arianna, it felt like divine intervention. I was in Vegas, where all good partnerships happen. And she was sitting across the table from me at a dinner. She looked at me directly in the eye and was like, "Who are you? You look interesting." And like they say, the rest is history. We just fell in love. We even took a photo that night to mark the occasion of the beginning of our friendship.
What does he mean by the current circumstance? Do you know, Arianna?
Well, it was clear that there were conservative Republicans in the caucus.
Arianna Huffington had really built a name for herself as a political columnist, and then she became a political pundit. She was everywhere on television.
You know, John, I hope you would agree with me that there's been far too much demonizing going on. I've always been fascinated by politics. You know, ever since I was a little girl growing up in Athens, I would watch political news that were happening in faraway countries that had nothing to do with me.
We're at a time now where everybody's a political commentator, but she was doing it before it seemed sort of like the thing to do, and really put herself out there and tried to make change in every way and wanted to impact the conversation.
I'm not, to say the least, a conventional candidate. But these are not conventional times. When I ran for governor, I decided to do it because it was a very unusual election. I ran as an independent. It was a recall election. It was a very short experience, less than 2 months. And when I dropped out, Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor. But I learned an enormous amount. I learned a lot, especially about the power of digital news.
At the time, the web was an aggregate of some bloggers and, you know, places for you to go to shop and all of that. You know, Facebook was like a year old. Twitter was not yet born.
I saw the conversation moving online. I was fascinated by blogs and bloggers, and I saw how vibrant that community was becoming. That was one of the motivations behind launching HuffPost, which Kenny Lair, my co-founder, and I launched in May 2005.
Well, if you like surfing the web, you have definitely checked out the Huffington Post at one point or another.
I begged her not to use our last name when she was starting this site.
The Huffington Post was a radical idea, the idea that you could have a front page to the internet. And so you had this real new game changer come in out of nowhere.
The Huffington Post was not a traditional newspaper the way we thought of it. It was a next-generation digital platform which would serve as an aggregator for columnists from all over the world.
Elevating the idea of blogging, which at the time was seen as something that people who couldn't get jobs were doing in their parents' basement in their pajamas.
It was this whole crazy new thing. She was so ahead of her time, they all were, and there was so much negative press when it launched.
The reviews initially were really negative. I remember one of them by heart. It said, "The Huffington Post is an unsurvivable failure." A year later, the person who wrote the review reached out to me and said I was wrong. HuffPost has become an indispensable part of the internet, and I'd like to write for you. And I said yes, because one thing that I always remember my mother taught me is never to hold grudges.
Instantly, it became clear that here was a new model. It wasn't just drawing traffic, it was drawing an audience. And so I think that much of old media realized they had to sort of jump into this game.
And I'll read a quote from the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post from Huffington Post.
The Huffington Post. She was a true leader there.
She loved having, the platform and allowing people to write about things that they really cared about.
And what I think really made Huffington Post successful was the fact that it became a social community. People could comment. Some of these blogs would draw thousands of comments.
She wanted it to be legitimate, she wanted it to be recognized, and it changed the whole industry around news.
From the beginning, we had a very ambitious roadmap of doing original investigative reporting, of launching video streaming, of going global. So these were all ambitions that we had at the beginning. And the main reason I decided to sell HuffPost to AOL in 2011 was because I was going to have much more funding to be able to do all these things at once.
AOL's Huffington Post purchase causing big moves in the media space.
She started with just about $1 million in financing, and the fact that it became such a success that it could sell for $315 million means that she did something right.
I love talking about the fact that I launched the Huffington Post at 55. So the founder game is not just a young person's game.
I think that, in this era of everyone wanting to be super successful when they're 25, she didn't do that until she was in her mid-50s. It really shows who my mom is that, at the height of that success, she said, I want to be doing something else.
She fell down, hit her head, bunch of stitches near her eye.
I had zero intention in 2014 to leave HuffPost. I loved it like a third child. We realized that there was nothing wrong with her health, that it was really a burnout and stress. Two years into building HuffPost, by then a divorced mother of two teenage daughters, I had really bought into the collective delusion. The way to succeed, the way to be super mom and super founder was to burn out. She was working 24/7. Actually, that particular day, she had come back from a speech. She was on a red eye, and she went to CNN to do an interview. And when she came back, she went straight to her desk, processing, her paperwork and the emails. And she got up and she collapsed.
She fell down, hit her head, really clocked herself, had a big gash there, bunch of stitches near her eye. And she went to the doctor to figure out what had happened, and no one could point to any specific thing that was wrong with her.
Over the course of the visitations with the doctors, we realized that there was nothing wrong with her health, that it was really a burnout and stress. That was the wake-up call. That was the moment when I realized that not just I, but our whole world had bought into this delusion. And that the consequences were really catastrophic, both in terms of our health, our performance, our relationships, and we now see increasingly our mental health.
I think after her collapse, I think she became very interested in how can you be in the world but not get completely burned out. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
And that's when she realized that this was an epidemic in the country.
Showing her own vulnerability, showing where she made a mistake, and it was a mistake, what she was doing that ended up in a physical mistake. I mean, that's the ultimate vulnerability.
So part of my sense of mission is to stop people from having their wake-up calls. And Becky, a lot of their wake-up calls are much worse. She realized that now there was a mission to bring this awareness to other people. And that's when she wrote Thrive, Redefining Success, the Third Metric. I was in Hangzhou in China speaking at Jack Ma's first women's conference. And I spoke about Thrive, and I spoke about all these issues and the dangers of the way our cultures globally were fueled by stress and burnout.
Her ability to spot a trend in the future and drive that trend before it becomes mainstream is incredible.
Jack Ma said to me, if I were you, I would leave the Huffington Post, start a company based on the views that you expressed in your speech and in your book. Then he ended by saying, and if you decide to do that, I'll invest in it. And at the time, I really thought he was crazy. I had zero intention in 2014 to leave HuffPost. I really thought it was going to be my last act. I loved it like a third child. But it was as though he had planted a seed.
I think the fact that she's been able to change and evolve over time is absolutely impressive. Creating her company and then stepping down from that company and creating another one. It's amazing.
By 2016, I decided that I actually wanted to do that. I thought at first I would do it as a carve-out from my running HuffPost. But as I started raising money and Jack Ma and Joe Tsai actually did invest, I realized that I wanted to do it 100%. Thrive Global is a behavior change technology and media company.
We have this perception, business certainly does, that human beings are machines and you want to try to minimize the downtime and get the most productivity that you can out of them. And what she discovered was this is a myth.
You can, and indeed you should, and probably must, focus on the health and well-being of a workforce in order to achieve a highly performing, productive organization.
What Arianna Huffington is trying to do with Thrive Global is help companies and individuals understand that if they can take care of themselves and make sure that they're healthy, they will be more productive at work.
She came in and ran for all of our staff a session on meditation with her sister Agapi. One of our staff members actually put up his hand and said he needed a new bed, and she bought him a new bed.
That's what's so crazy about this, is that when your doctor told you that you should get 8 hours of sleep and drink a lot of water, it's like, what do I need 8 hours for? Arianna had told me, and I was like, it's time to go to bed. Let's go to sleep right now.
And so what Thrive's trying to do is take all this science and all this understanding and move it into the real world where it goes into practice, where it actually helps human beings.
All the changes we recommend are micro steps, meaning small incremental daily steps that lead to big changes.
A big eye-opener was I was out to dinner with my brother-in-law and I realized I'd left my phone in his car. I couldn't email anybody. I couldn't go to sleep because I was all stressed out when I got home and I had nowhere to surf. And so that kind of realization that I was absolutely addicted to my phone, that was an Arianna moment.
When you start to see, the real her really is beautiful. She cares. She cares about each interaction and she cares about the global picture. Arianna's doing this because she wants to make change.
But the mission is to help people realize that there is another life, another way to live. It is possible to be rested and productive and successful.
Thrive is risky. Going in and telling corporations, I want to change the behavior of your employees, and it's in your best interest to do that, and we'll show that, is radical. And she took it on.
When people are willing to put their arm around you and say, you know what, I know what you're trying to do, I know what you're trying to achieve, and I'm willing to back you, it's extraordinary. And Arianna is one of those rare people that's willing to give you the love, support, care, wisdom, guidance that you need.
The Thrive movement has given her sort of a freedom to be able to do more.
She didn't need to do Thrive. She was all set, but here she is going off on another adventure. You would admire her for that.
You talk about a wonderful life. Well, she's a life of wonder.
First of all, I describe her as the sister that I love so much. We've always had each other's back and we have each other's hearts to care for. I've learned so much from my failures. I've learned so much from the most challenging moments in my life. Sometimes I just felt I would just close my eyes and jump.
She's fearless and strong and driven and brilliant.
I think my mom is a really interesting mix because I think she's so warm on one hand and so forceful on the other hand. I think it's very rare for us to be able to operate in both spaces.
I think there are areas of my life where I've been fearless, but I define fearlessness as not the absence of fear, but doing something even while you're afraid.